Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the latest from the world of Brexit, where as well as weekly reminders about the damage Brexit is still causing, such as the new threat to clean drinking water, that'll be fun, we also get more useful news including subtle changes in language from the government and the EU setting out its stall for closer trade ties over the next few years. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So things, to me, look from the outside like they're chugging along all right. Keir Starmer has been saying for a couple of years now he wants an SPS agreement in order to reduce the level of checks on EU trade, mutual recognition of qualifications, and ideally some sort of deal for performers working around Europe. Aside on that, no one's really talking about it in too much detail, but you would think Pan-European Mediterranean Convention would be good as well. In response, the EU have said that they're not interested in using the upcoming renegotiation of the Trading Cooperation Agreement as a renegotiation. Only, as I said at the time, well, why then would they have included the need for discussions after 5 years when it would be definitely after a general election if they didn't want to use it to work on a closer arrangement with them? Why did the TCA have this process built into it in the first place? Other trade agreements don't. Certainly wasn't something Boris Johnson asked for. And now we're starting to see some movement. The EU are coming out with a bit of a list of things that they are interested in, which is really good news. The position Starmer found himself in a few months ago was of the EU saying, look, we're fine with things. If you want something, yeah, we can talk about it, but you need to come up with the proposals. Now, for various reasons, we're not going to be good at that. So we sort of needed the EU to help out a little bit. Indeed, the EU policy experts that I've been following have said as much. Everyone is going to be really disappointed if the UK has to do all the driving because we're not good at it. We already know that the EU are very interested in a youth mobility scheme, and they've also said we must comply with our previous treaties, including the Windsor Framework, before they'll consider new agreements, which is fair enough. I mean, why form an agreement with someone who hasn't honoured previous ones? But it also means they're open to new agreements. And Rachel Reeves has just confirmed that the UK will be honouring all those treaties that we've signed with the EU, although Labour will still prefer to get agreements on anything which makes the Windsor Framework easier to swallow in parallel. Because if we have to implement the full Windsor Framework now, that means trade barriers between Britain and Northern Ireland that create political aggro. But if we could get, say, an SPS agreement alongside implementing the Windsor Framework, then there would be fewer practical implications for that. It would actually dial down the crazy in Northern Ireland. And if the EU really do insist on full implementation of the framework before reaching an agreement on SPS, well, then that might be trouble ahead. In fact, the DUP are basically hoping that Labour can get this agreement as a way of partially untangling themselves from the Brexit they promoted. And now I see that the EU are also insisting on a fishing deal being one of the first things to be agreed. Now, you could easily read news like this as a bit of a worry, but I take it as a bit of a positive. First of all, fishing was one of the big areas slated for discussion when the TCA talks come up anyway. So the fact that the EU are saying they want a new deal on fishing completely blows away their earlier insistence that the TCA talks will be essentially rubber stamping an extension of the existing arrangement and not a renegotiation. No. This says they want a renegotiation. Marvellous, Stan will be responding. I want a renegotiation too. As for the specifics, obviously fishing is a hot potato, I guess. Much of the fishing industry still can't come to terms with the fact that they were sold a dud with Brexit. However, keep it in perspective. First of all, the fishing industry is tiny in the UK. A few days ago, I was reading in the Financial Times, they were raving about the success of Games Workshop, this fantasy games producer in Nottingham. It's worth more than our entire fishing industry. It was always a nonsense that the Tories pretended to care more about an industry doesn't even show up on the radar of our overall GDP than the rest of our economy. But Brexit actually hit fishing worse than most of those other industries anyway. So if we can get our SPS agreement, mutual recognition of qualifications, and something for performers in return for youth mobility deal of some kind, applying the Windsor Framework and granting more access to British fishing waters to European vessels, that will be a big win. And as economists keep pointing out, be a win to both the EU and the UK, so there's no cherry picking about it. It will also be a big step towards the EU, and we should really be getting behind this move instead of attacking it. Remember that the SPS agreement can't possibly work without aligned standards. It's impossible. And you can't just align them at one moment in time. There's going to need to be some sort of dynamic alignment to keep it going. Labour know this, which is why they're legislating to make it easier for ministers to align a lot of our standards with the EU. It's also why Labour have not echoed Tory distaste for the European Court of Justice, because, none of Labour's aims are possible without a role for them. If we can get an agreement in the next few years, along the lines of what both the EU and the UK are asking for, then despite the rhetoric about the red lines, what we will have actually done is taken a big step towards the EU in a way that we simply couldn't do if we just tried to open up negotiations for joining the single market. And that will only be a matter of time. Another interesting snippet was from Angela Rayner on the BBC yesterday. So she said, when we left the EU, people were promised more money into the NHS, living standards would be better, and the opposite has happened. Which is an interesting little adjustment from Labour. See, up until recently, Labour have put the emphasis on all of the Brexit problems entirely on the Tory trade deal, rather than Brexit at a fundamental level. Now, being clear, Labour under Starmer have never once defended Brexit as even possibly a good policy. They just haven't attacked the concept for a while. Keen to emphasise that they understand why some people voted for it and want to bring people together. And so in order to marry up a policy of wanting a closer relationship with the EU without poking at the Brexit divisions that still blight a lot of relationships around the country, they directed their Brexit attacks on the Tory deal. Starmer would call it a weak deal, even though any deal would have been worse than continuing membership. But they have never said otherwise, largely because nobody's actually asked them to go into detail about their view of Brexit. But now we have language starting to creep in which attacks Brexit more generally, rather than just the Tory deal. A little nudge in the way Brexit is being discussed publicly. So we've had recently Rachel Reeves describing Brexit as an economic challenge, to now Rayner putting the emphasis on Brexit rather than the Tories' Brexit. Now, we're not going to move rapidly to a new agreement. Not only have policy experts said, look, do not expect quick movement from the EU. It's not going to happen. And if you try and force it, you'll just get nothing. But both sides seem to want to use the Trade and Cooperation Review as the vehicle for these trade discussions. And that review is set for 2026. So another year where we can try to keep encouraging cabinet ministers to talk a bit more openly about the damage that Brexit is causing and a more positive direction of travel to reverse that damage, especially as although Labour are right to say we shouldn't be choosing between the USA and the EU, because that is Brexit level thinking that we should just abandon an entire market, Trump may well force the choice on us, and Labour have already made it clear what their priority is. Come 2026, the case for much closer alignment than is even currently being planned could be more urgent. In my view, it will help if we lay the groundwork for that by discussing Brexit more honestly. And that applies to everyone, activists and politicians. Maybe not the media. Would be nice, but I think that would be like trying to get blood out of a stone. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching. And until next time, I'll see you later.